Now we get to the last position of, well, the category of defense or attack and defense. And here actually we have the game between Magnus Carlsen and Anish Giri. And I would say if Anish Giri opponent wouldn't have been Magnus Carlsen, but anyone else, maybe slightly weaker or even of equal level, then he would have definitely taken another decision than what he did in the game. Here Carlsen met a very strong and unexpected move. He played f4. What is f4 about? I mean, f4 has of course the idea at some point to push f5, so Black can hardly ignore it, because after f5, well, he wouldn't be in the best situation, also because of space disadvantage. So after f4, it's clear that Black has to capture. And now, of course, what was the intention of Magnus Carlsen? Well, I can tell you the intention was that he was ready to sacrifice a pawn, because if he plays e takes f4, then queen e6, queen g4 is one issue. Also, the question is, what did f4 give us? But maybe opening up the e file, there is not much of a benefit. Besides, d3 is weak. But with g takes f4, the benefit is that now g3 and h3 squares are available, and I have some kind of rook swings connected to rook f3 and rook g3. And here comes the very interesting and most important moment in the game. Shall we take on e3 or shall we not take on e3? And when we take such a decision, of course, sometimes it's good to know who's our opponent, if our opponent is an active player or not, or if he's a positional player, or what kind of result are we needing? Do we need to win? Do we need to draw and stuff like this? All these kind of things are very much influencing our decision. Here, the opponent was Magnus Carlsen, and probably, that's what I believe at least, Anish was thinking, I will show Magnus that his f4 move and all his ideas behind that attacking move is too much. He overpushed. I will punish him. I will take the pawn. But on the other hand, I'm also convinced if his opponent was not necessarily Magnus Carlsen, then he might have taken a little bit more solid approach and would have thought, okay, I mean, the big danger is rook f3 and rook g3. That's the move I should prevent, and I need to find something prophylactical and against rook f3, and the prophylactical solution here is to play king h7, because now rook f3 fails to g6, and after king h7 actually the position is quite okay, because first of all e3 is still under attack, so you should now do something about it. And if you play e4, we can attack the queen. The queen finally needs to leave the h file, where it was anyway quite annoying. So let's say somewhere queen f3 or queen e2, and then we play f5, so you will never be able to push f5 yourself, and this position actually is quite fine for Black. Well, Giri decided to capture on e3 and probably like to show that Magnus was wrong with sacrificing the pawn on e3. So he took on e3, king h1, and now the plans actually for white are quite easy. I have a plan of rook f3, rook g3, I have a plan of rook g1, I have a plan of rook ce1. So from the practical point of view, there is no need to get into this, in my opinion, because it's clear that Black needs to find only good moves to defend, and maybe even this position is not defendable anymore. I can tell you, if you ask the computer here, white is already much better. Now let's check the moves. Bishop e6 looks like a good move, but okay, bishop e6 has many problems. One problem is it can run to f5. One other problem is it can run to like moves like rook e1, and at some point even rook f3 is available. So for this reason, actually, like bishop e6 is not what you want, and it might not even solve the issue. So instead of bishop e6, well, what else is possible? If you play something like f6, which at least closes up this diagonal, then after bishop e4 followed by queen g6 ideas, you are not happy. Even so, Black can try something like queen h3 to cause some trouble in white's position. The problem is that there is not really much of a trouble. The bishop is protecting the square. Let's say queen h7 check, bishop g6 check, rook e1 and taking on g7 followed by bishop e4, and I don't think we have to discuss this any further. So after king h1 leaves only the move rook d8. So, well, rook d8 is actually not only the move, but the problem is like you don't have good alternatives because all the other moves are not in your favor. If, for example, f5, then queen g6 is, I think, finishing the story. So you can't do this either. He played rook d8 to do something, but of course already he shouldn't be very happy. Now, instead of rook d8, I think I already mentioned that the d3 pawn is poisoned. So just to be sure that I mentioned it, rook d8 was played, rook e1, and now he played queen c5. If he takes on d3, then f5 is very strong. And when we look at all this kind of highlighted pieces, we can see queen is doing fine and red is doing not fine because, okay, white has a lot of space advantage. All his pieces are playing and black's pieces are quite awkward, especially c8 and a8 are not in the game. For example, like if bishop f8, then rook d1 is already following up. So, I mean, the position objectively is quite lost. So after rook e1, Giri played queen c5. Now f5. Once again, limiting the possibilities of black's bishop on c8. Bishop f8 was played and bishop e4. Now we are clearing the g file and the rooks will come on g1 or with rook e2, rook g2, two options. Rook d5 was played, making it a little bit harder for rook g1 because maybe of this guy on f5. That's why actually here Carlsen played rook f3 to prepare rook g1 or to prepare, well, rook g3, but maybe rook g1 is easier. Of course, here it would be the wrong decision to take on d5 because the diagonal is actually opening up and this bishop is much stronger than the rook on d5 under current circumstances. Rook f3 was played, b5 and rook g1. Rook a7 trying to push f6 and opening up the 7th rank, holding g7, but now another very strong move, bishop f6 was played. Here g6 followed in the game. Well, not many alternatives because I think everything already is quite weak in black's camp and it's a matter of time until black is mated. So he played g6. Here it's probably possible just to take on g6 and to play this position. However, like white to capture, white to sacrifice in a winning position and you're, well, forced to prove something if you can keep the position winning by not sacrificing. So this is a kind of practical thing unless you are sure that the sacrifice wins, but are not to sacrifice and to know, for example, like after queen h3, my position is winning, why should I care to calculate or why should I care to give material? That's why queen h3, in my opinion, is the easier practical decision. Rook d6. Here, queen h4, probably many moves already would be winning, but Carlsen chooses a way to play that he is sure that he wins at the end, and this is the most important. Here, Giri took finally on f6 as f takes g6 was probably a threat. He took bishop e7, queen takes c6, and okay, he won the game, not of our concern. I mean, I like this game so much because actually I know both players. I know the character of both players and actually I know that Anish Giri is a very strong defender and a very solid player. So for me it was astonishing that he would here take the pawn on e3, which is not in his style, which is not the kind of positions you would like to defend, especially not against the world champion. But I strongly believe he did so because it was Magnus facing him and not anyone else. So what do we learn from this game? I mean, usually when you take decisions on certain moves or variations, of course it's important to know whether your opponent is an attacking player or a positional player, or if you need a win or a loss or a draw. I mean, this of course makes sense to consider, but still usually you should be objective to the position and not objective towards who is your opponent. So I mean, objectively speaking, after taking on e3 and king h1, White has so many ideas, like in this position with rook f3, rook e1, and so on, that there is no need to even like go for this, because you know that you will suffer for a long time, and you know that you have to be precise for a long time. And unless you are an engine, it's very difficult as a human being to really keep this position all over the game. Despite that after queen e3 and king h1, white is even better already according to the engines. So I mean, very interesting for me to see that Anish Giri can decide in such a wrong way, or in all the wrong ways, but a good example even on the high level.